So thank you all for having us and for wanting to sit through this presentation. I hope that we will all enjoy it because I think it can be very inspirational to start thinking forward to the next AOM, where some of us may have more experience than others in certain areas. And so what this session will do is look forward, look ahead at what we can do in our potential submissions. And I know that there are different levels of experience in the room. Some people have been submitting forever, like Tom, and I know myself as well, and others. And some people have just decided to start now. And there's no time better than actually right at the beginning of one session so that you already know what to look for in order to get yourself oriented. So Stacy is our past chair. Last year she was the chair and she just finished her year of past chair, but she was so gentle as to kind of prepare a presentation and then basically say, hey, run with it. Joan and Tom, run with it because you guys are the two.
I like how you put that, gentle. Yes, it was very gentle.
But you know, at least I'll say it was gentle. So here's the thing. I'm sure that several of you or all of you are already familiar with the page, the AOM org page. And as you can see here in the presentation, that is encircled because that's what you want to do. Some people might want to put aom.com. Mistake, it leads you to another site. aom.org is the one. I actually once made the mistake to put aom.edu. Doesn't work. So it has to be the org one. And then if you want to get into the area where submissions are important, you want to go to your menu, of course, after signing in. And then you go to menu. So that's why we have the arrow there. And once you have clicked on menu, then you come across this page. On this page, you want to pay attention to this yellow encircled part. Everything here is very interesting, by the way. I have clicked every part at least once to read through it. But when it comes to AOM, the annual meeting, this is where you want to be by the submissions to make sure that you can read a little bit more about what type of submissions there are. And this is where Tom and I are going to jump in because I think we can both share some information on what it is. So after you click on submissions, this is what comes up. 4 options: papers, symposia, caucuses, and PDWs. I'm sure that several of you have experiences with these. I have never done a caucus. I know that AOM started, MSR started as one. I have never really done papers I've submitted papers to journals, but I've never done a paper session at AOM. These are the 2 that I'm really crazy about: symposia and PDWs. And I particularly love PDWs because they are so interactive, they're so engaging. Tom, you want to say something at this point?
No, I'd agree with what you're saying, Joan. The PDWs are the most rewarding part of this. Mm-hmm. The papers, I'm delivering one this time. I'm on a panel with 11 people. Wow. So you can imagine in an hour and a half how much time you get. It's going to be rapid fire, and so the value of the paper submission, however, is you get it does count as a publication at the AOM. So there's definitely value in it from that point of view. It may not be as rewarding as you think in terms of actually presenting it. I've been part of a symposia, and we'll talk about this later, but there are 2 types of symposia. I can't remember the detail, but here you're presenting ideas in a general broad perspective. I have never participated in a caucus. I don't know what they are. So, but that, yeah, PDW is great. And generally you do it with more than one person. That's been my experience. It becomes a collaborative exercise. You learn about people who are with similar interests. And that's really helpful too, I think. And same with symposia. That was I presented with Mark Krieger, and I'm sorry, I've forgotten everybody else on that, but there, oh, tell me, what's his name? Satinder.
Satinder Dhillon, yeah.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
Perspectives. Yeah.
I always say a symposium is like a PDW with evening gowns on, because it's just basically, it can be just as interactive, especially a panel symposium, because you have presenter symposia, which are more like paper presentations. So maybe we should go into the
Yeah.
different, the 4 different styles. So the paper sessions, by the way, the information that you see here on these presentations, this information you will find if you click on this, when you are on this page with the 4 different options. If you would click on papers, that is where it would lead you. It would give you information that we actually now have in this presentation, not necessarily in this format, but all the text is from there. So the submission rules for papers, there's something called the rule of 1. And what that means is that each paper may only be submitted to 1 division or interest group. So you cannot do it as you do with symposia or with PDWs, that you submit basically with 3 names. No, 1 division or interest group. And here's another one to really be mindful about. It needs to be original or new work. So you don't want your paper to be under review somewhere else, and definitely not to have been published somewhere else. And it doesn't matter whether that's an AOM or a non-AOM publication. If it has been published somewhere, or if it is under review somewhere, make sure that it at least has not been published, because you definitely don't want to run into that ethical dilemma. You can also not change the paper title, the abstract, the authorship, or the actual paper once it was submitted. So in other words, you cannot say, hey, I have another colleague who also would like their name there on my paper. I know we sometimes want to help our colleagues. No, once you have those 2 or 3 names that are on there, you cannot add more once it's submitted. There are also very specific formatting rules. So we want to call your attention to that. One of the formatting rules is that the paper cannot be longer than 40 pages. Please don't exceed those. Please don't deviate from the formatting rules, because then your paper will not be reviewed. Also, it is a double-blind peer review process where the papers are evaluated. So based on this, of course, your papers may be accepted or rejected, but if they are accepted, they may go into one of 2 types of paper sessions, either the division traditional paper sessions or the discussion paper sessions. And I believe that's what you're talking about, Tom, right?
Yeah.
The ones where papers are in groups.
They're combined into a panel kind of thing.
Yes. Anything else on paper sessions that you would like to share, Tom?
I don't think so. You've done a really good job so far here. I would just say that the amount of work that you have to put into submitting a paper is the same, almost the same as submitting to a journal. It's
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're looking, I would say it's not the same standard, because there's no, reject, revise, review. It's either reject or accept. But
So Tom, do you know whether if people present at the conference, right, and it counts as a peer-reviewed presentation or whatever, what happens with the papers after that? Can you still submit them somewhere else? Do you happen to know?
I believe you can.
You can afterwards.
Yeah.
Right, because they're not automatically being published in a journal of the academy.
They're not a journal publication. They're a conference proceeding
Yeah.
paper.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you can submit it, but somewhere else. Okay.
So that's my understanding, and I don't remember for sure, but worst comes to worst, you can change the title and a little bit of something someplace else and do it again. I learned this stuff from Russell Akoff.
And that's exactly what I'm doing. I submitted a paper here. I've actually revised it. Title's going to be different. I'm submitting it to a journal.
And actually, Russell once told us, though, journal said you can't submit it if it's submitted someplace else. So he submitted it to a number of places, and then he just, when it got accepted, he just told the others that it was an invited presentation. But then, of course, he was in a better position to do that than most of us.
All right. Well, now we've learned about that. And, again, I I have a tendency whenever I write a paper that I really want to see it published. And so
Yes.
submit it to a journal rather than go through the hoops of the conference. But I can also see where it might be a really good experience and a way to meet with other scholars and do stuff with other scholars if you do it at AOM. And there's a lot of honor in having your work affiliated to AOM. And so
And the theory at AOM was that you were submitting works in process and they would help you do it, but you know, sort of the competition drove that out.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so now actually I thought this was a nice idea from Stacy to ask which ones of the people that are here and that plan to submit something feels that this describes them best. So there are 4 options here. Just go ahead and let us know one of the 4 options that you feel describes you best. Just hit either 1 or 2, 3 or 4. So 1 is, I have a section of my thesis, maybe the literature review, that's probably the most eligible piece, or a partly written paper that I could submit. 2, I have a paper that I've been wanting to write that I want to submit. And then number 3, over the last 2 days, I had an insight about a paper that I want to submit. And number 4, I have a paper in the works, but I need some help getting it to the finish line and would welcome some co-authors. Let's see if there are any people who can identify with any of these sessions.
Put your numbers in the chat.
Just put your numbers in the chat.
Or 0 if none of the above.
Vikram has 1. So that's always, I think that is a very common way, a section of your thesis that you would like to submit, and especially the lit review gives a lot of validation as well. And Vikram said also 4. Paul gave 3. Over the last 2 days, I had an insight. I can understand being so immersed in this process that you get great insights about papers that you might want to submit. I have a paper that I have been wanting to write that I want to submit. Any others? One of the reasons why we're asking for this is also that you might decide based on whoever is here in this session to collaborate with the people that are here. You know, you might get some ideas. If you have some common reasons, you may decide to set up a brainstorm session and see where that will lead. So, you know, please continue to submit whatever ideas you have while we are continuing with the presentation in order to make sure that we get all the information in as broadly as possible.
Well, the other thing I think is helpful is if you are at 3, then you have an insight, but there's not much that's been developed, right? So you probably might consider that, should I be putting in a PDW rather than a paper, because the amount of work that's going to be required to put that into a paper kind of form between now and the submission of early January is going to be a lot. I mean, maybe you can do it. So I'm just saying, maybe you might want to find a collaborator that you can work with, and maybe you can find, you know, somebody else who's interested in this idea. Maybe you can put together a PDW around this, and you know, that sort of thing.
Or just talk with somebody that you feel that might help you based on the area of interest of what you have been. I'm actually now alluding to number 2. If there's a paper that you have been wanting to write and that you want to submit, but you haven't even started yet. Basically 2 and 3 are really close to each other.
They are, yeah.
You know, having an insight. Sometimes what I find myself doing, if I have an insight on a paper that I want to write, the writing itself doesn't really start, but it helps me when I make a drawing of it. Like, I want to start at this point, and then what I want to do is do a little bit of literature review. I want to interview 5 people on that. I want to do that type of study. And then these are some of the sources. So I'm making kind of a game plan for myself, and that game plan then materializes in a paper. Sometimes it takes longer, sometimes never, but it is at least, it's a beginning.
Yeah.
And somebody was asking, yeah, Isabel, the closing session with Stacy. Stacy can't be here, and so that is why we are taking care of this session. I saw this is a comment in the
Yeah.
box.
Yeah, I've been watching these comments and answering them. So
Anything else, Tom, on this?
no, I mean, the thing is, if I would suggest, Vikram and Paul basically said they're either, I think, 1 and 3 or 1 and 4, but especially 1 and 4, you might want to find somebody to work with to help you develop this further, either 1 and 4. 3, Paul, find some collaborators, put your idea down into a paragraph, and you probably know people who might be interested in your ideas. Send them the paragraph, see if they'd be prepared to work with you. If there's anybody here that you think might want to work with you, let us know.
Absolutely. And we're in a very collaborative community here where people love to work with one another. So your efforts will not get wasted by any means.
And I see Lee basically also saying in the comments about at the least challenging level, you can set up an AOM caucus. And Joan and I have never done that. So Lee, maybe you've done that and you can talk about it.
I've done it, but it's a long time ago, and I'm not absolutely sure that they still have the same provision, but they probably do. And that's the way things got started. It's actually was the very beginning of MSR.
What I heard.
After the original session, we just had some caucus groups the next year or two.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a place to find some potential collaborators, get some feedback on your process, have a good time, and maybe get your university to pay for your attending.
That's fantastic. And it's wonderful that this is where MSR started. I saw that in Stacy's notes as well. So yeah, indeed, this is not something that we should take lightly. Now, as for the
Vikram has his hand up. Sorry, I see Vikram.
Oh, somebody had. Oh yes, Vikram, go ahead.
I was just curious to understand this whole pecking order thing, right? Because there seems to be a first amongst equals of where AOM submission is it cannot have gone anywhere else. It has to go to AOM submission first.
Yeah.
At least it cannot have been published somewhere else.
Need not have been published.
Mm-hmm.
But then Lee was talking about things like changing the approach or making it slightly different. I just want to understand, because number of ideas and number of things that you're anytime working on are limited. Mm-hmm. And the avenues to get them out there in the world are many. Mm-hmm. And how do you thread this? Because you want to have integrity in terms of making sure you don't do anything wrong. At the same time, you don't want to be so careful that you kind of do a self-goal. You see where I'm going with this?
I do. So if we're looking at, you want to submit to the AOM, here's what I had written a paper for this term, for this session. I also wanted to get it published. So I actually had it submitted as an invited article to a publication. They aren't publishing it until after the AOM. So it will work. I'm not breaking any rules.
Okay.
If I had submitted the paper and it got published, then I'd be in trouble. I'd either have to withdraw it from AOM or whatever. So basically, most journals tell you that you cannot have your paper submitted somewhere else.
Yeah.
What I heard Lee saying is one of his colleagues found a way to manage that by submitting it to a bunch of journals. And when he got accepted at one, he would go back to the others and say that his paper was accepted as an invited article or something like that.
Well, he was far more than one of my colleagues. He was the founder, or at least one of the founders of Operations Research, developed this new field, and had, at the time that I knew him, and he went on for a while before passing away, he had done 175 books and papers.
Prolific.
But so, he could sort of get away with these things. And actually, when he left operations research, he wrote a scathing article about it, which was published in the main journal, which I'm sure was only because it was by him.
So one thing that
I'm not sure we're in the same boat.
No, I
So
would follow the rules. I mean,
yeah, please do. Please follow the rules. It's always the better way to go. And indeed, what I gathered from what Lee mentioned earlier was also that, for instance, if your paper gets presented at AOM and it is then basically a proceeding at that point, you can submit it somewhere and just slightly change the title, so that you have a proceeding on the topic, and then you can have a published paper on the topic also, but just a different title and a slightly different abstract. It is indeed very difficult for scholars because journals don't like it. Definitely peer-reviewed journals don't like it when your work is submitted concurrently at different places. And the reason is it makes sense because, it can be accepted somewhere, and then they are going through the pains of assigning reviewers who are also very busy people. And then if the paper gets accepted, then you say, oh, I'll withdraw because I've already got it accepted at such and such a place. So if you look at it from multiple places, you can see why they demand that. But what my concern is that sometimes the review process is so long. I've had papers on the review for over a year sometimes, especially when you have revise and resubmit, then, your paper can be on its way for over a year before it finally gets published. And sometimes after 2 revise and resubmits, you still have different reviewers, because it doesn't always happen that your paper is reviewed by the same people. And then the reviewer that comes at number 3 may reject it. And then after, wasting 8 months on waiting, the paper still gets rejected. So it's a pretty cumbersome path for scholars, I understand. But, hey, it's part of the game, I guess.
And it's a good idea if you're going to change this. Don't change just the title and abstract. Do a little other work on it. And frankly, our papers and so forth can almost always be improved by another round of adjustment.
Exactly. You can maybe take another author who adds a piece to it, so that things change in the conclusion, things change in the text, more research is done, more text is done, more literature review, so that it becomes a slightly different paper. Make sure that you at least cover yourself and try to go the ethical route as much as possible.
I agree.
Now, as for the symposia, there are 2 types, as Tom mentioned earlier. So you have a presenter symposium, which involves a series of authored papers at a preset time. And then you have the one I really like, a panel symposium, because that gives a lot more freedom. That engages a group of panelists in a formal interactive discussion around a theme or a question relevant to the field. That is the type of symposium that I call a PDW with a nightgown on, because it's very much in the style of a PDW. You have people that talk about a topic, and then they form a panel, and there is, dialogue going on. Now,
they're not blind reviewed either. Don't believe.
I think they are they are single blind review.
Oh, okay, single.
That's what I see there. So they're not double blind reviewed, they're single blind reviewed, but still, so they count as the scholarly part. That's why the symposia and the papers in the review process, they fall under the scholarly chair, and the PDWs, which are not blind reviewed, they are falling under the PDW chair. And that is, really, everybody needs to be very nice to Tom this year.
So what single blind reviewed means then, if I understand correctly, is they know who the submitters are. You just don't know who the reviewers are.
That's right. That's what I meant, actually.
Yes, exactly. So there it is too. When you submit it, the system will select potential sponsors, rank them in order of relevance, because you will decide, I want to submit it to MSR, and I want to submit it to OB, and I want to submit it to MET, for instance, based on the topic of the paper. If you want it to be an all academic that applies to multiple, all sessions or all DIGs, interest groups, and divisions, then you make it an all academy team, you submit it to that. But here's where it says they are single blind reviewed. So it is the chair of the scholarly department of any of the sections, be it a division or an interest group like MSR, who will then submit it to one external reviewer, one of the reviewers on their list of volunteers. And the reviewers will see your name, will see who the presenters are, who the participants are, and the organizers. So, you know, one of the things that I always say, this is my experience that I've learned, you want to have, I've seen that I've had more success with submissions, be it symposia and PDWs, where I've had multiple presenters listed or authors listed from multiple institutions. So not just 2 or 3 people from my institution, but people seem to love the fact that you're working together with other scholars. You know, so that is my tip for having bigger success in getting your work accepted. Try to work with people from different institutions, preferably a little bit global. Somebody from India, somebody from New Zealand, somebody from America, somebody from Canada. You know, it kind of makes a pretty impression, a nice impression, I think. And I've seen that those things rarely get or doesn't get rejected as easily as the ones that are single authored or, you know, one group from a homogeneous background.
I would agree with what Joan is saying, and also add that the experience of putting together something with a diverse group is also a learning experience. So there's a benefit in actually doing that. It's a bit more work, but it's a great experience.
Plus,
if you're presenting something that's new and innovative and challenging, it doesn't hurt for the symposium to have somebody as a panel member who's prominent in at least one of the divisions or interest groups that you're submitting it to, such as the chair, which was how I got the first management and spirituality symposium accepted in 1999.
there you go.
I would agree. That was my experience too. I mean, I got onto this panel with Satinder and you know, anyway, had, you know, big names, and so I was probably the junior person on that panel. But you know, it doesn't matter if you get somebody on the panel who's well known. I agree with that.
Yeah, that's the world that we live in. You know, have some big names there, or definitely diversity, and it helps because then the quality has already been established more or less. And again, also here, specific formatting, you really want to follow the rules. They're very meticulous on that. So please don't deviate from those, because otherwise you'll get in trouble and your work may not get accepted or not even read, not even entertained. Now, this is the part that we're not so familiar with, but Lee already mentioned, you know, MSR started as a caucus. And so caucuses seem to be very interesting to start with. The way it is worded here, caucuses provide an opportunity for scholars to innovate, share, and discuss emergent ideas that are still in the incubatory stage. Designed to develop a community and spark potential collaborations, they are an informal exchange with facilitators rather than designated presenters. Anybody here has some more experience with caucuses?
Well, I've had a bit of experience with them again a long time ago, and they're generally an enjoyable experience where you meet people and you may make contacts for further work. And it's generally very informal, so people usually don't have formal preparations for it. And typically they don't attract a lot of people. There's typically maybe 4 to 7 people around a table. Sometimes they will, of course, and sometimes they won't. But that's why the sponsorship, which has increased now recently as AOM has grown from 3 to 5, some other people at the Academy to say that they that they have interest in it. And AOM's hope is that they not only have interest in it, but they'll come to the conference and attend the caucus, but at least they have to say they have interest in it.
So Lee, what do you submit exactly? Do you submit a paper or what
No, it's as I remember it, again, it may have changed. It's pretty much just a discussion topic and a little bit about it to potentially attract people. So it's probably not any longer that at least than an abstract.
Mhm.
Mm.
Okay. Now, there's more to be read on the AOM website, by the way. There's a lot of explanation there. So again, we're not really familiar with caucuses, but you will read all about them on the site, and we just wanted to bring them to your attention. And then why don't I leave this up to Tom to share the PDWs, because he's the chair.
Okay. Well, here again, there is some preparation involved. And I think, as we already said, it's probably better to work with more than one person and from different institutions and even countries. But you can think of this as a paper in development. It's not fully developed. You don't have to present as much detail as you would with a paper. So if you're writing a paper for a journal, that would be equivalent to the paper presentation. This would be, I have an idea and I want to share how I implement it in a circumstance. So professional development means people are going to walk out of that not with remembering the references you provided or any, like wonderful theory, but they're going to remember an experience that helps them in whatever enterprise they're involved in, whether it's in the teaching or perhaps consulting or whatever they might be interested in. And you have to plan an interactive component. So it can't be just 5 people delivering stuff. You are required to engage the community. And I was in one where they actually had somebody monitoring what you were doing. They actually monitored what percentage of the time was you were doing presentation and what percentage of the time was interaction. So this is monitored. It may not be monitored for everybody, but there is a check on it. So it does have to be a transfer of what I would call experiential knowledge by engaging people. I've done a number of these, 3 of them in what I would say using emotion in the classroom. These can be a lot of fun, and because you're engaging people in their personal experiences. And one we're doing is on invoking a loving inquiry in management and education. And the process of preparing for it is developing a paper, is about applying collaborative autoethnography, but we're also going to engage the audience in collaborative autoethnography, although we're not going to write any papers out of it. But that's what you're doing here. So I don't know, does anybody have any questions here about this? So back to you, Joan, I think, unless you have some observations.
If you don't want to necessarily speak up, you can always write your questions and we can go from there. But again, your PDW can have multiple directions. It can be based on teaching, it can be based on your research, but making it interactive is the key here. And I have found that you can basically use a similar topic in different formats, because usually a certain topic fits in multiple titles of the AOM meeting. So because the titles are very much into let's make more oneness, let's get together, let's change the face of management. And so what you submitted last year may just have to be tweaked, and you can submit it again this year. Just don't submit the same thing over and over again, because it won't fly and it's not fun for yourself either. But if you have a group of people that you work with, you'll be amazed to find out what great ideas come about. And there is no time better to plan than right when you are at AOM. So if you're going live to the session, that's where you'll meet like-minded spirits and you will be able to talk to them about it. So the recommendation was actually to stop here and think about things, but I would like to first show this last slide, and then we can stop the presentation and discuss a little bit. The last few tips are that the AOM submission deadline is always the second week of January. So again, the best time is to start thinking now, and definitely once we know the topic. Do we already know next year's topic? I don't think so. I was looking on the website. I didn't find it, but I may not have looked good enough. But you know, please,
Usually it's the first or second week, like January the 12th or something.
No, but I'm talking about the topic. Do we already know what the topic?
No, I don't.
The
I don't know
conference
what it is.
topic is? I don't think it is
No.
announced yet. So as soon as you know that, then you can start thinking how it is that you want to submit something and what you want to submit and who you want to work together. Another interesting statement, indeed, and very true, you're not alone. You'll want to work with different people to find the people and, of course, the topics that you want to work on. Typically, established scholars start working early. As I said, right at the current AOM, you will have them work together and think already. I remember in the years that I was working very closely with Satinder and Jerry Bieberman, we would sit at the current AOM to talk about next AOM already. What are we going to submit? Is there a book that we can write on this topic? How are we going to do this? Who shall we go talk to? Okay, let's go talk to Paul Grave. Let's see what we can do. This is where, you know, scholars really try to get most done. And then, you know, try to start working right when you're back after the session. That's basically the best way, I believe, to get things done and to keep your inspiration going so that it doesn't run away from you. I actually wanted to ask if there are, and I know there are several seasoned scholars, if there are any topics that you would like to type in the room, in the chat. Just type a few statements that you feel that you can give the younger scholars along. Anyone. So, you know, Tom.
Or just speak up.
We can speak up, or we can type because we're not such a large group. So go ahead. Any other suggestions? Any suggestions that we can give away? Again, my best suggestion that I have from the heart is work with people from different backgrounds, different schools, different, if possible, different continents, because that gives a global perspective. It also helps you in your efforts. Due to the fact that I started at AOM doing this, working with different people, that brought to mind doing books with multiple chapters, anthologies, because, you know, you're working together to go to AOM, and before you realize it, you have a group of 10, 12 people that you're working with, and you say, hey, why don't we write a book together? You write about this, I write about that, and so on. And before you know it, you have a great proposal that you submit to one of the publishers, and it gets published. You know, and one thing leads to another, and your network becomes only bigger. And before you realize it, you're working with, I cannot tell you how many people over time, over 10 years, over 12 years that we've been doing this, 14 years now. Our network has grown out, it has gone through the roof. So it is something that I've learned that is very valuable. Are there questions? Oh, Lee, you are muted. I don't know, maybe he's not speaking to us. Maybe
I don't know, maybe he's talking to somebody else.
Yeah, could be. Any other statements, Tom?
Yeah, I think you've covered it well. I don't know what else to say other than, you know, when you're looking at working with people, make sure that there's some kind of alignment between what your interests are and their interests are. You want to work with people that, you know, there's a heart connection. How do I put it other than just, you know, you feel comfortable working with these people? And just as an aside, I don't think, well, I shouldn't say this, but I doubt if we'll enter another PDW, but 3 years in a row, we have had a PDW on emotions. And I'll say that as we have developed as a community around this idea and learned from each other throughout. So the other part of this is there's a learning in preparing the PDWs, because they have to be experiential. So that you have to prepare experiential content. You have to work with people experientially yourself. So there's an education component, a self-education component to this, which I think is great.
Another thing that I think that what you just said came to my mind is the fact that interdisciplinarity works a lot too. I, for instance, submitted with 10 people, 9 other people from different entities, a session on poetry. Poetry as it applies to management, you know, and organizational behavior. They really like that, it seems. So the whole interdisciplinary mindset, if you bring in music, if you bring in meditation, if you bring in poetry, something that ties the soft skills in, those things seem to work very well. So please keep that in mind as well when you submit. Other pointers?
Just one point on books. Books chapters may not count as much for your academic movement in the world, but they do enable you to put out ideas that you might not be able to get in another place. So they have the benefit of you getting your ideas out. They have the shortcoming of the fact that they're not as credible according to academia as peer-reviewed journals.
Peer-reviewed journals, yeah. But I found that if you're at an AACSB school, what will happen, at least at my school, of the 5 intellectual contributions that you have to submit over a rolling 5-year period, 2 have to be peer-reviewed journal quality, and of those 2, 1 really has to be a peer-reviewed journal, and the other one can be a book chapter, but it has to be by an academic.
I see.
An academic publisher, because there at least the proposal had to be peer reviewed, and usually also if it is edited by other scholars, there is a peer review process amongst one another where they send the chapters that are submitted toward one another to review.
Yeah.
So please consider those. If we don't have any other questions or concerns, I think we can be grateful for having been together and thank everybody who has been so relentlessly active with all this. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Shawan. Thank you, Lee. Thanks everybody for doing this. I think it was a wonderful and enriching experience.
Thank you, Joan, for joining us a little bit early and taking the reins here. It's great. I really appreciate your involvement and the contributions you've made to this amazing 2 days. It's been phenomenal. It's just been amazing. I've mentioned this before, but I've been involved with this colloquium since I think in 2016, when there were maybe 35, 40 people, and we had like 270 registered, and at certain times over 70 or 80 people online at one time, and people from all over the world. It's just an amazing development. And so with that, we'll pass it over to Paul and Shawan for our wrap up.